Welcome to Last First Date Radio, featuring interviews with experts in dating, relating, and mating in midlife. And now, here's your host, Sandy Weiner.
This is episode number 391 with Dr. David Simonsen. Can social media ruin a relationship? Hey everybody, this is Sandy Weiner and welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late for love and that a woman of value naturally attracts the respect and rewards that she deserves in life and in love. What is a woman of value? She's somebody who knows her worth and she shows up, stands up, and speaks up. Every week I bring you a tip on how to become a woman of value, and this week's tip is practice saying no. And actually, we need to balance our yeses and our nos, but we often say yes when we mean no. And I just got off the phone with my married daughter who lives in Israel, and she was telling me that she's learning to just say no to people who make requests of her that she doesn't want to do. And I'm really proud of her, because when my kids speak up and really follow their authentic needs and desires, that just makes me so happy. So my challenge for you this week is to practice saying no to something you're saying yes to and really check in with yourself. Before I bring my guest on, I just want to remind everybody that we have this free, amazing Facebook group, and we would love for you to join. It is called Your Last First Date. So when you're done listening, go into Facebook groups and look for Your Last First Date and join us. We are a positive, forward-moving group that is heavily monitored so that we don't have conversations that stay negative and victim-y and name-calling. None of that is allowed. We really want you to go on your last first date, and we do that by having positive feedback. So join us there. And now for my guest, Dr. David Simonsen. He has been helping couples and families for 20 years. He understands the challenges that arise in relationships, and he uses a humor-filled approach to help people become more authentic and more emotionally intimate. He's been married for 25 years, and he has 7 kids to prove that his approach works. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
7 kids, wow, in 25 years.
I tell people that it's 7 kids. They're all my own and all my wife's. There's no blended family going on, and it's one son out of those 7. So he's currently at college, so I'm with a lot of ladies in my life.
A lot of estrogen there.
I'm definitely outnumbered there for sure.
Yeah, that's quite an undertaking. I had 4 of my own, and it's a lot. Having
all girls, mixed?
2 and 2.
2 and 2. Okay. Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
The perfect American family.
That's right. We are all American. Everybody behaves perfectly, and they eat 3 balanced meals every day.
That's great. That's great.
No, they're all
I like what you had to say about learning to say no. I mean, I think that's. I was thinking, okay, that's like all about boundaries, right? Boundaries are great things to have in relationships for sure.
Boundaries are everything.
That's a whole nother conversation.
I actually teach a whole course on boundaries with a co-leader, because they come up for, every single thing that we do. And I listen to my son talk about his job, and he works for Apple, and it's all about boundaries. A customer comes in, wants something that you can't do for them, and you've got to let somebody know, hey, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do. This is what you should be doing at home. This is what you can stay in here and do. And it's like just giving people that kind of information, whether it's in a relationship or in a, client-customer kind of situation. It's like makes people feel at ease, makes people feel comfortable. Right?
It's for sure.
Such an important thing. All right, so let's get into the topic of the day. But first, I would love to know, how did you decide to get into this business that you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I like how you say it's a business, because there is a business side to it, right? I am a helping professional, but there is a business side. So a long time ago, I was a police officer. for several years. And one of the things that I found when I was a police officer, and I was young, right? So I wasn't I didn't have the knowledge that I have now. Immature, right? I call myself immature. And so I was helping people, but I was helping them into jail. And, 3 weeks later, I'd be back at the house again for another, domestic violence type issue, or a kid was out of control or something like that. If you ever watch Cops or any police shows, you see that, like there's cops will say, oh, we've run into this person before. So I was single when I was a police officer. I got married, and then we decided to go overseas and teach English. And when we were coming to the end of our contract, I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? I want to help people still, but I don't want to get back into law enforcement. And so I just kind of stumbled across a counseling program, a licensed marriage and family therapy program in Seattle, and kind of looked into that and thought, hey, maybe this is something that I want to do. And so I applied and got accepted into the program. And then 2 years later, had a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and then became licensed and kind of have been doing that since 2000. 98 is when I started my program, but then when I graduated, it was 2000, and so I've been doing that ever since. And along the way, I found that when I was out of school, I was thinking, oh, I need to get back into school and like further my education. But then when I was in school, I would hate it. And so I started on this path to get a PhD in family psychology, and it was long because I had kids at the time also, and I finally got that in 2013, and so I'm done with school. No more school for me. So that's kind of the short story of how I got to where I'm at today.
Okay. So that's interesting. So being a police officer, seeing the same mistakes over and over again, and just people ending up in jail and not really resolving issues, is that was kind of the catalyst to like,
yeah, and see, like, and especially in relationships, seeing like domestic violence relationships where a woman or a man would say, I know I need to leave this relationship. I know it's horrible. What's happening to me is wrong. But then they just couldn't do it, right? And I think, again, that goes to what we just talked about earlier, is boundaries. They have an inability to enforce boundaries. And so then there's this generational stuff that happens. These kids see their parents being abused, and then they bring that into their own relationships. And so I think that's partly what creates cynicism amongst a lot of first responders, is because they keep going back to the same place over and over with the same people. And so I wanted to figure out a way to help people change that, and that's kind of what led me down the route of counseling.
Interesting. So now you can actually help people and not just put them in jail.
Yes. I mean, I like to think I help people, but I just last week I got a text from a wife of a couple that I've been working with saying, I'm divorcing my husband. I will be meeting with you alone this next week. He's not coming in. And I don't want people to divorce, right? That I'm not a fan of it. And so, but people get to make choices because they're adults. And so, it'll be an interesting conversation to see what led to this outcome. But I mean, it happens. And so I like to think I do my best to help people, but again, people get to make choices.
They get to make choices, yes. And some relationships are really challenging more than others. And so a lot of times, it's interesting how people often will choose the same partner over and over again, because they blame somebody outside themselves, and they don't see what their part is in the relationship not working.
Well, one of the things I do specifically with most of the couples that I work with, I do a family of origin sketch, because I think often what happens is trauma that someone has experienced as a child gets unresolved, and so they try to resolve that trauma as adults. And when I say trauma, it could be something where, oh, my dad didn't pay attention to me. I'm not talking like deep emotional.
Yeah.
Trauma is kind of a general word for there's something that happened that was an emotional injury. And a lot of times people get married and it hasn't been resolved well. And so they try to resolve it in their marriage. And that's where a lot of conflicts and problems come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I mean, I do the same thing because I think we have to connect the dots between where you came from and the choices that we make in relationships because they're always connected.
Oh, yeah.
And I think a lot of people, like I didn't see it in my own relationship. In my marriage, I thought I was choosing smartly because I understood what was wrong with my parents' marriage and my trauma, but I didn't see the issues with my now ex-husband and our relationship. It felt like I was making a logical choice that would help me divorce-proof my life. I had no idea what I was doing. I really didn't, but I thought I did. So, so I mean, I'd love to talk more about what makes a couple succeed and what doesn't, but I also want to get to the topic of today's episode, which is social media, and then we can go deeper into couples and what makes them work or not. Yeah, so if people are dating or in relationships, what do you think what role should social media play in that relationship?
I think the role it should play is very little. I think often what happens with social media is that it's a distractor. How I see it often is for women, it's a way to, and I'm generalizing here, I'm not, everyone should know that. So oftentimes for women, it turns out to be this place where they can get attention. And for men, it's often a place where they can, when they're unhappy in their relationship, they can find people to connect, find people of the opposite sex to connect with. And I think that generally social media, like it's just a thing. How it's used is what makes it good or bad in a relationship. And so you can have a relationship where a couple takes pictures of what they're doing in life, and it's very innocuous. But where it gets kind of sketchy, I think, and where it's not helpful in relationships is when there's kind of some secretiveness around it. I think with any kind of social media, when there's secretiveness around things and, oh, I don't want you to see this and I'm hiding this, social media account from you. That's where social media kind of hurts relationships. And so I think ultimately, it's a neutral thing. How people use it is the problem, and what they do with it and how they use it, I think, is the problem.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're talking probably about a younger demographic, like 20s and 30s, I'm imagining, like where the social media like Instagram becomes much more of a distractor. People are on it all day long, and now we have TikTok, and oh my God, like my son works with a woman who dances on TikTok, and it's like, you're getting all this attention for doing these sexy dances. And what if you're in a relationship and you're getting attention from other men? Like, what does that say? Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't want to sound like, what was that? Okay, boomer, right? I don't want to sound like, oh, but I mean, I still remember a day when I would just go to school and interact with people, and there was no such thing as a cell phone, right? And I survived, and I think I turned out okay. Again, I get technology, and I just don't have time for TikTok, right? I barely have time to do my own podcast and then post on Instagram. I can't imagine doing TikTok and Snapchat and all these other things. It's just like, I don't have time for that. And I think there needs to be a balance in relationships. And I've seen relationships, I mean, a common theme that I hear in a lot of the younger couples that I interact with is that there's one half of the couple is spending too much time on the phone. And that's where I think then social media, not just social media, but then a phone becomes a negative thing in a relationship. And I think you just have to be honest with yourself about, am I actually using this thing too much? I think a lot of times when it gets pointed out, a person gets defensive.
Mm-hmm.
And then they want to point out, well, you're spending this much time on it as well, and to justify their time. I just don't, guys, let's not, just own it, right? Just be responsible for yourself and kind of step back and think, am I spending too much time? And chances are you probably are. If someone's pointing it out to you, chances are you are spending a bit too much time. And that definitely kills relationships.
So let's go a little deeper into that. Like, why is that such a relationship killer?
Well, I mean, I think it's a relationship killer because when you're in a relationship with somebody, I think of a triangle, right? In the therapy world, there's this thing called the triangle. And every point of the triangle, you put something. So at the bottom 2 points could be the couple, like A and B. And then at the top point, usually it's another person in a relationship. But I mean, in this instance, it could be the phone, right? And so triangles are created to reduce anxiety. So if A and B couple are having issues, a phone is a great way to avoid those issues by like looking at Instagram, Snapchatting somebody, TikToking, being on Craigslist, whatever it is. And so I think people use phones and social media as an escape often. And then that's where inappropriate relationships often start because, oh, look at this person, this half naked person, I'm going to message them. And then a relationship starts there, and then infidelity happens. But I think ultimately it's people use social media to escape. Some people use it just because they're bored, but I think when it goes bad, it's because people are using it to escape dealing with problems in their own relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're escaping our own problems. And also, I think we're disconnecting, and relationships are all about connection. And so when you have a phone between you, and people do this, I mean, you go to a restaurant, you see everybody is on their phone sitting next to each other. It's like, it really blows my mind.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, I remember.
Oh, go ahead.
Just to finish, like my daughter, who's now 25, when she was in high school, she used to come home and want to go right to the computer at the time and chat with her friends, like, whatever they were doing in those days. Maybe they were also texting. But I just wanted that 20 minutes dinner. Like, I'm making your favorite dinner. Let's just sit together. The rest of the night, you can do whatever you want, but just, I want to connect. I know. Call me crazy. And I would set it up too. I would set it up in advance. What kind of dinner do you want me to have ready for you? Let's eat together. And she'd agree to it. And then she'd come home, fill her plate up, and then run to her bedroom and lock the door. I'd be like, but now we have a very different relationship. But I remember back then just feeling like, she figuratively closed the door on me, but she also emotionally closed the door on me. And I felt like I just wanted connection. Mm-hmm. So what we do when we have our phones is we're saying, it's like stonewalling. You're putting up a barrier between you and that other person.
Yeah, I often call it, so I do family counseling in homes. And so a lot of times I'll be in home with, a mom and dad and a teenager. And, the teenager inevitably gets on their phone at some point. And I call it whispering, because I view it like, oh, who are you whispering to over there? Because they know what's going on, but none of us know what's happening. And so I feel like I agree with you. It's disconnecting, but I also think how that is like kind of what happens when we whisper to somebody and no one really knows what's being said. But I agree. I mean, relationships are all about connecting. I was just going to tell you, so I can't remember where, it was like a couple nights ago. I just got back from vacation, and so we were out for dinner with some friends. And so I got on my cell phone because I was bored. And my wife, she says, hey, get off your cell phone. That's not appropriate at the table. And I had two choices, right? I could either get defensive and kind of, defend myself, or I could own it and say, yeah, you're right. So I owned it and said, yeah, you're right, and put my phone away. And it's such a temptation, like for people, because if you are not interested in the conversation that's happening around you, if you're bored or whatever, it's just an easy thing to pull out and start looking at. And I often wonder, how did I can't remember, but like when I was in my mid-20s, how did I keep conversations going around the dinner table when there was no such thing as a cell phone? But yeah, I mean, I think self-control is a big part of having, not being on your phone around people that you care about.
Yeah, and it's disconnecting. I remember my father used to lead a Passover Seder for like this catering firm that he worked for. And we all had to sit there, the whole family. It was the most boring thing in the world. So, and we're at the dais, so like we can't talk, we can't do. And this was a long time ago, but I used to bring a book and I would read the book under the table. So there was a way to do it without a phone, but it's true. It's like I think cell phones, it's anything with technology. We have these amazing tools that we can use for good, and we can also get carried away and become addicted to them. And it's the same with work. We have a computer. I work at home and I could be on this computer the entire night. I could disconnect from everybody, or I could use it for what it's made, which is to have a home business and be able to work with anybody anywhere in the world. So it's, but I love that term whispering. I think that's such a great, I can really get the metaphor of it, because we can't hear what's happening on the other end.
Yeah.
So I never thought of it that way.
I'm still thinking about your story about the Seder, and like people looking like, oh, Sandy, she's so reverent. Wow. She's always just looking down.
She's right. She's so reverent. Well, let's say irreverent is really more like. Right. Yeah, it's I find like at family events having a phone really helps today.
Yeah.
But anyway, so couples, what's something that also used to come up a lot around social media was when to post that you're in a relationship, and this is more of a Facebook thing. But people used to say in a relationship, and that was like big deal. So how do you feel about people posting that?
I think that people we're in thankfully a free country, right? So people get to do what they want, even if it's really dumb. But I guess I don't have like a really strong opinion on that. I think that what I think is interesting is people don't seem to have shame, right? So I've seen a couple times where someone's divorced, just newly divorced, and then like a month later, there's pictures of them with, their new girlfriend or new boyfriend. And I think, to me, I mean, I view that differently as a therapist, because I know that divorce takes an emotional toll on people. And so, and not just the person that's getting divorced, but the kids that are involved and things like that. And so when I see that online, I don't usually think that's a good move, just because I don't think enough kind of good processing has probably happened. Now, I'm just taking a guess based on my experience of working with couples and working with divorced people. So I don't think it probably doesn't apply to everybody, but I think in general, a kid's going to see, oh, mom or dad has their new boyfriend or girlfriend, the kid already knows that. And I don't know, I wouldn't do it personally, because I like to be a bit more private about that kind of stuff. But again, I think that's kind of the norm often, is that you see people posting left and right about the new relationships that they're in. The thing that I think is interesting is like these people are in relationships and they get out of relationships and then they delete all the pictures that were of this wife or husband or ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, which I always think is funny, because it seems inauthentic then. Like you were ashamed of that person that you were just married to for 20 years. I don't know. It gets kind of confusing.
Yeah.
And so I think as a general rule, I don't encourage people to post relationship stuff online, just when relationships are new. But if they're older, if they're more long-term relationships, I think it's more fine. I think it's often what I find when someone first finds out they're pregnant. And when we first would find out we're pregnant, we wanted everyone to know. There's no social media back then. But then after getting pregnant and then having some miscarriages, we didn't tell people, right? We would wait a month or several weeks at least before we'd tell people, because then it just would create some awkwardness. People say, "Oh, how's your pregnancy?" And like, "Oh, I had a miscarriage." And so I encourage people to, I mean, that's a social media thing as well. That's not necessarily relationship related, but I think it's just generally not a good idea to announce on social media a new thing, because you could be broken up in a week later. And so then I think you get viewed as kind of a foolish person.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think anyone wants to be viewed as a foolish person.
No, I don't think so either. But it's a good distinction to make, though, that the newness of it is, give it some time, number one.
Right.
And, I think people post way too much stuff, private stuff, I think, on social media. I think that you can't take it back. It's like out there forever, even if you delete stuff. And the other thing is that, I once heard something like the best sign of a healthy relationship is no sign of it on social media. And it reminds me a little bit of like PDA, like people who are constantly touching each other in public are usually not touching each other in private so much. You always wonder, like, do you have to touch each other every second? And, what are you hiding? And I think that's also something to consider. But the other thing is, consider your children if you're newly divorced. And I totally agree with you on that. I think that, kids don't need to see, just like I wouldn't introduce a new partner to my kids unless it was super serious. I also wouldn't put that on social media. So, and then the whole, go ahead.
I'm outrageous, and people don't like this often. Some people do. But when there's a divorce and there's children, I encourage people not to remarry until their kids are up and out, because I've seen so many horrible blended families where the kids hate the stepmom or the stepdad, or the stepdad or stepmom hate the kids, the bio kids of their partner. And I get pushback from that, because people say, "Well, I want to have a life. I just think, statistically, it's not great for the kids to do that."
I hear what you're saying, and I think that part of the issue is that people don't get proper therapy. They don't integrate families in a healthy way. And I know, like, my son sent his father a whole bunch of articles about how he dated after divorce. He was like, "Dad, you're doing it all wrong. Here's some articles to back me up." It was like, because the kids were really upset. He was introducing them too soon, and to their kids, and like, having Passover Seder together with somebody he just started dating, and
then
here's their son, right?
And then what if they break up, right? And then it's just like weird. Oh, I guess we don't see these people anymore. Oh, now there's this new person. And so, I think I agree. I think that people need to be a bit more contemplative about how they do dating after divorce when there's kids involved, for sure.
Yeah. And that's a whole other podcast. I just did a Facebook Live on this topic for my group because it's such an important topic, and it comes up all the time. Like, when do I introduce them, and how do I introduce them, and do I have them sleep over, and when do they sleep over? And, it depends on how old your kids are and all kinds of stuff. So, all right. So let's get back to social media.
Okay. Thank you for steering this ship. I appreciate you.
I'm not always so good at steering, because I like all the side conversations. They're all interesting to me. So people should be mindful of their social media. They should be mindful of how much time they spend on social media or on their phones in general when they're with each other. So that's if you're in a relationship. I think another issue that comes up a lot is what people have posted of themselves, all the selfies, all the other people they've dated. And so somebody's getting to know somebody. They want to connect on social media. Now on Instagram, you can follow somebody easily. On Facebook, you have to friend somebody to really get access to all their photos and stuff. But all of a sudden you're seeing this person and the side of them, and you're like judging the person based on how many bikinis this woman is wearing, or, you know, this guy is with a different woman in every picture. So what do you have to say about all of that?
As a general rule of thumb, so anything I say, I always say it's just general, right?
Okay.
I don't say this always happens. I
Right.
have a big sign in my office that says no absolutes, because I think absolutes generally are not a great idea. But I think if you go to someone's Instagram profile and 75 to 80% of the pictures are of them, I would steer clear of that person, because I think they may not have narcissistic personality disorder, but I would say that there's a good chance that there's some narcissistic traits that they have. If you go to so I have two Instagrams. I have a business Instagram, Dr. David, and then just a personal Instagram. And so if you go to my Instagram, I have pictures of my kids, of memes that I've made. It's very rare that I have any pictures of me, because people already know what I look like. And they don't need to see me like with pouty lips or with duck wings, you know. So I don't understand it. I mean, I know for a lot of teens, they do a lot of selfies, and I think it's just this cry for, I need approval, look at me. And I just think, I don't think that's healthy. And so I think that if you like somebody and that's kind of what they're posting, a lot of it's just themselves, I wouldn't encourage you to continue on in that relationship, because I don't think there's not a lot of depth to them if it's pictures mostly of themselves.
That's a pretty fair assessment.
But, I mean, I'm not out there looking to date, right? So, but when I do look at an Instagram profile, I immediately notice if most of the pictures are of them.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're very curated type pictures, right? Versus, you know, I look in the backgrounds of pictures and see if there's a mess. And if there's a mess, I actually respect the person a bit more than if it's like super tidy and everything looks like it's in order. Because I've got 7 kids, so I know that that's not real life when everything looks all nice and neat in the background.
Well, you have 7 kids. I don't have any kids living in my, I mean, I don't
well,
have any
yours,
kids
so
anymore.
I was thinking, as I was saying this, I was thinking about your background. It's completely different, right? Because you don't have an 8, 9, 12, 14, 16-year-old living in your home, not picking up after themselves.
Right.
I'm assuming
I
you
don't.
don't.
I don't. I have grandkids, and when they're
Okay.
here, the house is a mess. But they live in Israel, so they're not here very often.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's true, though. It's nice when somebody's life is imperfect and they're not afraid to show imperfection. I think that's what you're saying, because I think that there are so many pictures, like you were saying, curated with the filters and the posing and just all of this stuff. It just feels fake. And then you don't really trust that this is a real person or this is somebody I want to get to know.
Right.
Yeah.
So if someone owns a selfie stick, I also think that's I never understood the selfie stick, because, you know, if you think about the stick, it holds your camera and it's pointing at you doing something. And I always think, I don't want to see that person doing something. I want it to be faced out so I can see what's going on around them. I don't want to see their reaction to going down a water slide. I want to see the water slide and what's around it. And so I was given a selfie stick as a Christmas present. I used it once and I just felt gross to use it. And so I never used it again.
So just want to reframe selfie stick here for a minute.
Yeah.
I agree with you, and it's all about me, 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 and we have too much of that in our generation now. But I used a selfie stick. I don't anymore. When I started doing Facebook Lives and things like that on my phone, so that I could keep it steady and hold it farther back, and maybe go outside and do a,
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. Hey, look at this thing that I'm doing, right? What you're talking about is I don't view that as a bad thing. What I'm viewing it as, like, I'm on vacation. Hey, look at me riding this camel, right? And
Right.
so then it's just a picture of them with a hump. Like, great. That's great. I know what you look like. I know what a camel's
Right.
hump looks like. Let me see the surrounding area.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Like a
for your
GoPro,
purposes,
which would take the
yes,
view out.
exactly.
Right. So let's have a GoPro view of the world, and
Yes,
instead of a selfie stick view of the world. No, I
yes.
get what you're saying. I'm just saying that not all people with selfie sticks are just
Well,
doing
right. So when I
selfies.
do my Insta stories, it's not a selfie stick, but it's a stand, right, that
Mhm.
holds my camera and stuff. I mean, so yeah, you want it to be steady. So that would make
Right.
sense on why you would have that.
Yeah. You don't want to be nauseous when you watch somebody do
Right,
it.
right.
That's a whole other kind of sick. um, all right. So, what would you advise to a couple who are dating and have this social media issue of, one member, like you said, is on their phone too much, is on Instagram, on TikTok, on all whatever,
Yeah.
and disconnecting? How would you suggest that they begin to deal with that?
So for me, I would want to say I would want to go deeper. Like, I think that's a symptom of something else. And so I would want to understand, is it actually a symptom, or is one person in that couple, that partnership, just bored, and they have an ineffective way to deal with their boredom? Because if it is just about boredom, I think then that would be a different conversation than I'm just wanting to emotionally disconnect from my partner. Because if they want to emotionally disconnect from my partner, I think that's a more serious issue. So there's two ways that I would address it. I mean, the one way I would address it is, if it's an issue, for the person just to own it. I think, again, what I talked about earlier has to do with emotional intelligence. One person says, "Hey, you're doing this thing," and instead of thinking, "Am I doing this thing? Oh yeah, I am. I should maybe change that." Which is high emotional intelligence. They usually often they revert to, like, "Well, you're doing it too," which then doesn't address the issue. It just deflects it back to the person, and then that inevitably turns into a fight. And so what I encourage couples to do, if something like that is brought up, um, don't get defensive about it. Think about what your partner is saying to you, and then, is there truth behind it? And if there is truth behind it, then own it and try to change it. Now, sometimes people, um, they don't want to change it. And so if they don't want to change it and they want to stay on their phone, then that facilitates a whole nother conversation about, maybe this is not a relationship that you want to be in.
Mhm.
Because if you're feeling disconnected from your partner and your partner doesn't really care, why would you want to be in a relationship like
Yeah.
that? But if it's simply about boredom, like, "Oh, there's nothing else to do, I was just on my phone," I would have a conversation with them, like, "Well, there are other things to do. You guys could go on a walk. You guys could spend time with your children. You could do this. You could do that." And so I think a lot of it depends on the reason behind the use of the social media or the electronic device. It could be video games,
Right.
Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever.
Yeah, and Apple just came out with the Apple Arcade, which is
Oh,
going to suck a lot of people down that hole.
okay. I have
My
not
son,
heard that yet.
yeah, my son works for Apple, so he got access to it, and he shows me this cool game, and it's like, how many hours are you? No, he's very good
Yeah.
about moderating it, but it is easy to get sucked down that path, man.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a
Oh,
Words
yeah.
with Friends player, and I can ignore everybody and just catch up on my games until I realize that there are people around me. So I
Yes.
just as you have to be conscious about
Yeah.
what you're doing and why you're doing it. All right, so David, I always ask my guests this final question, which is, what is one final word of advice that you have for anybody who wants to go on their last first date?
Pay attention to red flags. I think that a lot of times couples that I run into will talk about 10 red flags that were there before they got married, but they thought they were yellow flags. But I hear them and I think, no, those were red flags. And they get married anyways. And so my biggest encouragement to people is, if there is a yellow flag in your relationship or a red flag, but especially if there's a yellow flag and you're hoping to maybe get married to this person or partner up with them long term, seek out some couples counseling, because a third party can really help you drill down and nail if those are actual issues that need to be addressed or that are deal breakers in a relationship.
Excellent advice. As somebody who has pushed red flags under carpets many times until I couldn't walk anymore because I was tripping over them, I totally hear you. I think often we excuse the inexcusable, and those yellow flags are usually red flags.
Right. I think a lot of times what happens is we second guess ourselves. And like what you said at the start, is like, we say yes when we should be saying no. And I think our emotions cloud our judgment when our brain actually is saying, this is not a relationship you should be in. But then your emotions tell you, oh, but he's so nice, or she's just so pleasant. And, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. I can overlook this. Mm-hmm. And then you're 2 years in and you think, what was I thinking?
Yeah,
why am I in this relationship?
Yeah, I love watching these reality shows on TV where people are coupling up or getting back together with an ex or whatever the show is. And you see, like, the issues are so clear. From the outside looking in, you see how they argue. One is defensive. And there was just this show called Love is Blind, which was big on Netflix the last couple of weeks. And there's this one couple where she was on social media as soon as they gave them their phones back. And he called her on, and he's like, what he really wasn't saying is, I feel like you're ignoring me and I feel sad. And instead he's just accusing, and she gets defensive and shuts down and says, but you do that, but just like what you said. Yeah. And you're going, this isn't going to last, because they don't know how to argue at all. They have no idea how to resolve conflict.
That is accurate. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to steer clear of that show. That'll just be frustrating to watch.
It is, but you can't stop watching it. It's so addictive. It's like, so you can see everything unfolding and you still can't stop. It's like watching the accident happen on the side.
Yeah, it's like you think, okay, there's an accident about to happen. Oh, it's happening. Wow, look at that.
Right. I know. Oh my God, look, I can't stop looking. Anyway, well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a great conversation. And I just think people need to know social media can be a good thing and it can be a total disaster. And you get to choose how you use it and choose wisely.
Yep.
So David, tell everybody how they can find you.
You can find me lots of ways. If you just Google Dr. David Simonsen, I'll come up. I'll also come up with, there's a rabbi named David Simonsen who is passed on, and there is a murderer in Oregon named David Simonsen. Wow. So you'll find me. I think I come up first usually. You can go on Instagram.
You're not dead and you're not a murderer.
Yeah, I know. It's great. You can go on Instagram and just search Dr. David Simonsen, or on Facebook. It's Ask Doc David, I think, is my Facebook page. But Google's your friend. If you find me, and it'll give you my website, and then everything is on my website, my podcast and YouTube channel, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. All of this will be in the show notes when I post this to my blog, lastfirstdate.com. And I want to thank all our listeners today for listening. And please don't forget to check out Your Last First Date on Facebook and join us there if you haven't already. And we hope you go on your last first date very soon. Have a great day.